And there was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God and the altar, and them that worship therein.
Good morning and welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini. It's good to be with you again here in the Gospel of Matthew. You'll remember last time we left off with the Lord talking to the disciples of John the Baptist, where they had asked him, how is it that the disciples of the Pharisees and the disciples of John often fast, but your disciples don't fast? Why is that? Well, it was an interesting question because they look at the doctrinal differences, just like in any religious context. You're going to say, like, well, why do you do things differently? And Jesus gives this analogy of a bride, of a wedding. Can the children of the bride chamber fast while the bridegroom is with them? Because the whole point of John's ministry was to pave the way for Jesus, and so he was anticipating the arrival of Jesus, waiting for him, fasting, praying, looking for the glorious appearing of the Messiah. And then the Pharisees similarly had a sense that there were things they wanted, whatever they happened to be praying for, But the appearance of Christ represented the joyous occasion of that which, men have prayed for being delivered to them. And that is always a time for celebration when your prayers are answered. And, it's just normal behavior that when you're looking for something from God, you pray, you fast, and when you receive it, you rejoice, and that's appropriate. And so the coming of Christ was an occasion for rejoicing. And while he was in the world, his disciples naturally ate and drank with him and rejoiced, as opposed to, the usual thing, which is, with most ministries of any kind of, guru or leader from all kinds of religions, they teach them, all right, fast, pray. Here's how you communicate with God. Here's how you reach out in terms of the things that are concerning you. Here's how you meditate on them. This is the methods we do to to practice our religion in that sphere of activity. And so the ministry of Jesus Christ was very different in that, he was there, they could talk to him, and it was from the top down done differently. I'm having a sip of coffee here. This might be too hot. Yeah, I brewed it a little too late. Oh, well, okay. So in the midst of talking about this wedding analogy, he goes on to say, well, he also said, when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, then shall they fast, alluding to his crucifixion and his ascension, obviously, because he could have been crucified and rose from the dead, and then there would be no need for sorrow, only for joy. But, in that he has departed the world, we desire his return, so we pray, and we may even fast. I mean, I've found most occasion for fasting for desiring his greater influence and impact on my life. I want him to, help me overcome some sin, or change my behavior in some way. And that's usually the thing I'm fasting about. It's like, I need your help. Seeking first the kingdom of God, you will have the most fruitful results of your prayer. If you're looking to make yourself conformable to God's kingdom, God is most likely to hear you. And he says, no man putteth a piece of new cloth into an old garment, for that which is put in to fill... For some reason, this is my brain. For that which is put in to fill it up taketh from the garment, and the rent is made worse. And that's, of course, a reference to the idea of, if you patch a piece of cloth with an old piece of cloth with a new piece of cloth, the idea is that if it's a new piece of cloth, that it would shrink. This is not the days of pre-shrunk fabrics sewn together by machines, but this is rather, ancient times. So clothes shrank, garments shrank. So if you took a patch that was the right size for the old garment of new cloth, a patch of new cloth for the old garment, sewed it in, it would take from the garment, meaning it would shrink away from it and start pulling on it and make the rent worse, because wherever it was torn, it would now be torn where the stitching was, and it would get bigger overall. And he continues the analogy with a second one as a second witness. Neither do men put new wine into old bottles, else the bottles break, and the wine runneth out, and the bottles perish. But they put new wine into new bottles, and both are preserved. And this refers to the practice of putting wine into skins. These are skins, not glass bottles. Obviously, glass bottles, this wouldn't apply because they can take a lot of pressure. But the process of fermentation, gases are released, and so the bottle has to expand, these wine skins. They would have to expand with the liquid inside, and they would harden. So if you try to put new wine, meaning freshly you're trying to make or that hasn't fermented yet, into an old bottle that is already, it's all stretched out already. It's like trying to wrap an old rubber band around something, one that's all lost its rubberiness. It snaps. It doesn't have the flexibility to take on that new task. And in the next verse, he goes on to another significant story about a healing. And but this analogy is something I bring up from time to time, and it's important for us because the meaning is obvious that people set in their old ways, do not readily change their ways, especially when it comes to religion. It's like Jesus said in another place, no man having tasted old wine likes new wine. He says the old is better. And I've definitely, I lived that in my life. I think about the way I grew up as a child and stuff. It's just everything seemed better, brighter, and newer because I was younger then. It's just a natural human inclination. But, to be Christians, though, not everybody, it's not just a function of age. It's a function of our mentality. And it's also like an interesting, there's an interesting dichotomy or a play between the idea of you don't want to be like a reed shaken in the wind, as John was described by Jesus. He said, what went you out there in the wilderness for to see? A reed shaken in the wind. And John the Baptist was no reed shaken in the wind. He was not someone who blew, we don't want to be, children tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. That's something Paul said. We don't want to be someone who is easily turned from our conviction. Who has persuaded you? Who has seduced you from the truth? We want to be solid in our foundations of the truth. But on the other hand, we want to be flexible. We want to be able to receive new wine. We want to be able to receive new truth. It's a difficult thing if you think about it in religion. There's so many denominations, right? And they don't all totally agree. There are some big points on which they all agree, and that, idea of greater Christianity, you think about things like the rapture, right? That's not a universally held belief. That's just really a small, let's not say small. It's just a large subsection of Christians believe in the rapture. And the idea is, it might sort of meme its way out of the evangelical movement and the fundamentalist movement into other branches of Christianity and even popular culture. But it's by no means universal. What I'm saying is, there are certainly universally held beliefs in Christianity, Jesus' resurrection, and not universally even, actually, I should say, where you have a super majority. upwards of 90% of Christians agreeing. And these things are obviously Christian beliefs. Of course, then you can start arguing about who's a Christian, because some people, those numbers get skewed the more marginal versions of Christianity you admit. You start admitting Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, which most people consider Christians, even though I know most evangelicals or traditionalists would definitely reject them. But they will skew the numbers a bit. So there are all these different thoughts out there about details of Christianity, and you think like, well, Lutheranism's been around for 500 years. I forgot what the exact date. I think he was back in the 1300s. Yeah, sure, because I think Columbus was right after the Inquisition in the 1492. So it's back in the 1300s, I believe, when he nailed his 95 Theses to the Brandenburg Tor. Brandenburg. Sorry, my pronunciation's a little lazy when I haven't had my coffee. Let's see if that'll help. Anyways, so we have all kinds of but Luther was a smart guy. John Calvin was a smart guy. They all came up with their doctrines. They formed their denominations. And then for centuries after, people follow them. But even the wisest among us doesn't necessarily get the full revelation from God. You consider the degree to which John the Baptist was in the dark, and he was called by Jesus the greatest of the prophets. You consider the degree to which the prophets, didn't know what was coming, but they were only inspired and given shadows and glimpses of what was to come. And the nature of Messiah was not fully understood. Obviously, you think about all the confusion there was when Jesus came. A lot of people didn't accept him, even in spite of all the miracles he did. So, we have this tendency, or human beings have this tendency to latch on to tradition. And then when something new comes along, it's almost like deadly to them. They're like a new wineskin. You try to put the new wine in them, and they explode. Metaphorically, it becomes mind blowing. It's too much, and there's two possible outcomes really, and I see this a lot of times with people. Well, on one hand, I see people who some new truth comes along, and it destroys their faith. And I see other people, some new truth comes along and they just deny it and ignore it. But both ways are a form of disaster, really. Because on one hand, you're rejecting a truth to hold on to what you believe is true. On the other hand, you're rejecting everything you believed was true because another truth has sort of shattered a portion of it. Because, I was talking over the weekend about why I believe, and there are things that can come against your faith that are true, like a lot of things, a lot of scientific evidence. There can be evidence about the Bible. There can be all kinds of things that come along, and they have a tendency, if you have a specified interpretation, a very stiff and inflexible interpretation and understanding of the Bible and of Jesus and of Christianity, it can rock the foundations of your faith. And either, faced with that, you're either going to turn away from it and just say, I'm not going to deal with that. And that's not something I never had the luxury of doing. Well, I did it, but it's not like it didn't continue to eat at me. Because someone brings something to me, I'm like, well, I'm going to just provisionally, as my original teacher said, put that on a shelf because I don't know how to deal with that right now. I'm going to set that aside for a little while. I'm not going to throw it out, but I'm going to just sort of shelve it for a bit because I don't know how to deal with this. And that sometimes is an essential step because we need to, we don't want to make a drastic decision that is damaging either to our faith or to the faith. Meaning, on one hand, if we allow, let's say, I use an unlikely example, but something that makes sense to me. Let's say somebody believes that the Bible teaches the earth is 6,000 years old because they took the genealogies as being like literal and accurate records of time from the beginning of the creation to this day, as opposed to, I don't want to say symbolic representations, because let's say approximations and sort of almost prophetic approximations, meaning there's a perfection in the biblical numbers. I have to confess, because the more I live with it, the more I think about the perfection of the fact that Jesus appeared 4,000 years into the Bible. He didn't appear 4,000 years into history necessarily, into the history of the physical earth, but into the history which the Bible contains, he appears exactly 4,000 years into it. And that's definitely significant. But let's say you take that information and say, well, that means also the external world, the earth itself, is only as old as that allows. But that's how we ought to interpret the Bible. All right, and that's an easy interpretation to make. It's simplified. Let's say evidence comes along, like you discover the fact that there are literally thousands of meteoric craters around the earth, all at various states of decay. And some look untouched, certainly untouched by any flood. You know what I mean? This interpretation also requires you to believe in a literal global flood, as opposed to a local flood or an allegorical flood, or the flood being representative of all the myriad times in which humanity gave itself over to wickedness, just like Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah was a form of a local flood. There was a flood of fire and brimstone that came down upon that city. And so there is and so if we let evil into our societies and it festers and grows and our thoughts become evil only all the time, we also will be carried away of the flood, of another kind of flood, not a flood of waters. And a few of us will be left. People will die. So let's say they're confronted with the idea of like, okay, well, maybe the earth is much older than I've been believing, but I believe that's what the Bible says. So there are two reactions one can have. It can destroy their faith, meaning they can say, well, the Bible must be wrong. If it's wrong in this point, it's got to be wrong about everything. I mean, to me, that's that's a reaction you can only have if you believe in fundamentalism. If you believe that the Bible is a scientific textbook, like that God was like, I'm going to inspire these ancient dudes to put in all kinds of accurate date information, because that's the way in which I like to inspire people, is to give them facts and figures and numbers. It's not that the Holy Spirit speaks the wisdom and truth of the ages to them concerning morality and how men ought to live. No, that's not the inspiration. That may be part of the inspiration of God, but another important part of the inspiration of God is scientific facts being encoded into the scriptures. Like, if you actually think that that is how the Bible is, I can see how, like, confronting the evidence of the creation, which is an unmediated testimony of God. I mean, there are scientists interpreting the evidence, and that is a mediation, meaning it's coming through a human being. And so, therefore, that is subject to question. But they do question it. There's a lot of people who question, and these things are reviewed. And I certainly don't believe there's a conspiracy, because I'll tell you what, you look at the photographs of the meteor craters all over the world, and I remember I was like, wow, this just seems impossible to believe. For me, it was more about the flood. It made me say, like, okay, I remember when my wife asked me, when was the flood? I'm like, maybe 100,000 years ago? I don't know. I'm like, I'd like it to be local, but the scriptures seem to say it's worldwide. And that's the way the story is written, for certain. And I don't know, it's hard to get around that. I mean, you can, but it feels very like, I feel a little dirty when I do that. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm skirting what the Bible is just saying, instead of just letting it speak. And so, that's one reaction, is I can say, well, then I don't believe the Bible anymore, because the earth is older than that, and the flood that I believe in is unlikely based on the evidence in the world. There are these craters that are, I'm not going to get into the dates of them, because they'll say, well, the science, they say it's millions of years old, but that could be wrong. Right, okay. But we have thousands of craters all over the world. Some of them would be like, I mean, people would know, and there'd be like historical records, and there'd be major devastation, and I mean, like, there's all over the world. There's just so many of them, and they're in such various states of decay. They couldn't have all happened right after the flood, and most of them have been around for much longer than that. You know what I mean? So, like, when did all these meteors hit? And the logical answer is they must have hit over a very long period of time. They couldn't have happened during the flood. A lot of the ones I'm thinking of, the ones after, or the ones before, because they say, like, well, the rock deposits, well, the fossils, that's the flood, and well, what about the stuff on the surface of the ground that's like just barely covered over? So that would all have to have happened at the end, after all the sediments were laid down. Anyways, I don't want to make this about this, but it's not the specific subject, but I'm just saying these are the different ways you could react. On one hand, you could reject your faith, and I've seen that. Former fundamentalists who are atheists are actually very common. It's a common thread among atheists. I used to be a fundamentalist Christian. I don't see a lot of people who say, I used to be a something else. I used to be I don't know a specific denomination that. I hear I used to be Catholic, but people who leave Catholicism leave for other reasons. There's a lot of different. They leave a lot of times because of there's a sort of cultic nature about it. Anyways, I mean, the way they raise kids in it is it smells of brainwashing, And I apologize to Catholics if you don't like that, but the way children are raised in it is very, it has a bad effect on a lot of people. So I give the one possible reaction: you reject the faith. The other one is you damage the faith. Which is, one is they're falling on their sword, so to speak. They're hurting themselves. The other is like they take this thing and they say, no, I'm not going to, I reject that. In fact, I'm going to work, a lot of them, they work very hard to establish their interpretation and to interpret the evidence of the external world in light of their interpretation of the Bible. Which, your interpretation of the Bible is a double mediation. Meaning, God has His truth, and He inspires a person to write something in the Bible. And then you go and you read that thing and you interpret it. So that's like, it's gone through two human hands before it got to, it's highly suspicious. Our interpretations of the facts are suspect. They are subject to our subjective perspective, our prejudice, our perception of reality colors everything we do. And so, people tell me all kinds of like, I got a book and I read this and that and the other. And my main argument is that I maintain flexibility. You can tell me some new fact, it doesn't like blow my mind because I can accommodate it. I can expand my understanding to accommodate all kinds of facts because the primary facts of my faith are the Lord Jesus and His resurrection. They are His teachings, the things He taught us, how we ought to live. And I will argue with anyone about that. But I'm flexible. Like I said, it's like, I don't want to be a reed shaken in the wind. I don't want to be blown to and fro with every wind of doctrine. I don't want to be like a raging wave of the sea foaming out my shame, unable to take shape, unable to take the shape of Christ, unable to form myself into the resurrected form of man, which is glorified in Jesus Christ, and ready to do good works, ready to perform righteousness, ready to exhibit godliness and live in holiness. I want to do all that, and that I will lay my life down upon and fight for with all my might. But even in my understanding of that, it's like I am flexible. I think I used, the way I used to preach was a little more stiff. It was a little more influenced of fundamentalist presuppositions. Like, this is the only way. It's like this is the way I think is right, and I certainly teach it with all my I teach things with authority to the degree I feel that I am convinced that it is correct, but also with a sense of humility, remembering all the times I was wrong. You have to have that's another thing, is like that, having the rug pulled out from under you like that, you have to be humble. You know what I mean? Like, because that's what it is. It's like, I thought the earth was 6,000 years old, and this proves it wasn't. And I'm a fool, and I reject Christianity because I feel like I look stupid. I remember this guy was saying how resentful he felt about his Christianity, his time as a Christian, and all the stupid things he said, and the stupid things this, and the stupid... And I listened to all that he was saying, and I thought, my Christianity is nothing like that. And it was just... And I looked at him like, you're proud. And you feel humiliated that you did things that you now think were foolish. But they were always foolish in my... I know there's foolishness in it. There's even the foolishness of preaching. I mean, there's something sort of foolishness about belief. It's not... I think belief is rational, but it's not 100% rational. On some level... on some level, you're acting on sort of presuppositions about life, about how things... you have to... What I mean is, like, there are some assumptions you make at the beginning. There are some beliefs you have at the very core that you didn't come about through rational thought. And I don't even know how you'd come to them through rational thought. And there's no evidence that, the humans never did come to these things through rational thought. What happens is they came to these conclusions, and then afterwards they try to rationalize them. That's what happens, is people believe things and they say, well, this is why, this is why, this is why. We need flexibility in what we think we know. That's why Jesus said things like, take heed how you hear. Because we can hear things wrong. One of the most important aspects of our walk is our perception. How we perceive things, how we see things. That was what the blind Pharisee, like, they had such blindness, and it was not blindness of like they couldn't see anything. It was blindness as that everything they saw was distorted by their perception. They perceived Jesus as a threat. They perceived Jesus as disrespectful, as blasphemous. They never once considered that it's like, well, maybe it's not blasphemy if it's true. I am the Son of God is blasphemy if I am not the Son of God. But if I am the Son of God, then, it's the truth, and they should have bowed before him. But they represent that quintessential old wineskin. They were inflexible. They had doctrines. They had beliefs. It was blasphemy. It is heresy. It is this. It is that. And then anyone comes along and violates those things, it is automatically thrown into that category. Same thing with denominations and stuff, like I was saying. It's like, you think like, well, there was Luther, and then there's been Lutheranism for like 500-600 years. And you think you're telling me that 6 centuries of Christians could be wrong? Well, I don't know. When Luther came along, like 12 centuries of Christians were apparently wrong because Lutheranism came around. Like, well, no, that was a return to the beginning. Yeah, everyone is going back to the apostolic faith. Everyone's got the Bible, and they're reinterpreting and saying, we're going to be like the original Christians. But the truth is, none of us are. None of us are like the original. It is almost impossible to be that way. It's possible to share the same doctrines, but we live in such a different world. We have such different, considering that the average Christian in the first century was going to be illiterate, considering the average Christian in the first 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 centuries of Christianity didn't even have access to a Bible. It was, in fact, the access to the Bible that led to the Reformation. And that sort of opening of understanding and allowing of free thought actually led to the Enlightenment. Though that's not given credit, The thought that we could decide for ourselves, the printing press, and then the Bible being the first thing printed, and people taking up the Bible and saying, hey, you're misinterpreting this, or we think that this is not, no, this is the way it should be interpreted. That was a revolutionary thing, because now the idea that we should make up our own mind and we shouldn't look to these authorities, that was never part of Christianity. Like, oh yeah, just look to the equivalent of the scribes and Pharisees, they won't lead you wrong. That was never part of the faith. But without access to the scriptures, how could you ever come to that conclusion? So let us not allow our faith to be destroyed. Let us not allow us to destroy the faith with our stubbornness, with our pride. He says, this is the position I'm in, and I'm not moving, no matter what, because they bring ill repute to the faith. When I get into an argument with an atheist about God, I'm not only arguing with them, I'm almost invariably arguing with the fundamentalist view of Christianity, because that is the view of Christianity they place. They put me into that box from the get-go, usually, until I disabuse them of that notion, and actually a lot of them are quite generous in at least letting me describe my own beliefs, as opposed to trying to force someone else's beliefs on me. But the comments you will see on YouTube, the comments you will see around the internet from atheists, almost always are from a fundamentalist point of view. Like if they're talking about Noah's Ark, it's from a fundamentalist point of view. If they're talking about Genesis, it's from a fundamentalist point of view. They're not discussing the truth, like the deep truths contained within the stories in Genesis. They're discussing only the bare facts of, like, well, the idea of that it must have been literal history, and if there's anything in there that doesn't fit in with the idea of literal history, if there's any absurdity, any miraculous, anything out of the ordinary, that makes it less believable, as opposed to just learning from what is there and taking in. Here's the thing: you always want to capture the most significant truth. Like, the most significant truth of Genesis is not you believe that a snake was talking. The most significant truth is what was said to the woman and what was said to the serpent and what was meant by that of God. The meaning of those things. That's what's important. I'm at the halfway point. I want to check the chat, the pop-up chat. Looks like there's no commentary or questions in there. Let's see if I can make that pop into my window. There we go. There we go. So that's the chat. No comments, which is fine. Sorry, my eyes are dried up, so I'm like resting one. Alright. Oh, I meant to do this. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies with Paul Strangini. That's me. I have a website, oraclesofgod.org. I have hundreds of hours of studies available there. They are pretty condensed, at least the later ones. And there are some single subject studies which you may find enjoyable, based, topical studies. I haven't done a lot of topical studies on this channel yet. And there's my other YouTube channel. They're both personal pages. Ugh, sorry, it was a good time to yawn. You have to watch it. Then my music there. I also have a lot of songs and stuff on my website, scripture songs. Whole chat. I play that stuff. The music I play at the beginning and the end. That's most of that's actually from a project I'm working on, and I've been working on forever. So let's get back to our study now. On to the second half hour of this study, and let's go on verse wise. Oop, wrong piece of software. Anything more to say? Well, there's a lot of ways we can be offended in what we receive, the truth that comes into us, and there's also this sort of, people have trouble just believing that there could be anything new. In the time of the Pharisees, the idea of anything new, and even today, people are very reluctant to think of new revelation. You think when Jesus came, he revealed things that sort of contradicted what was accepted as true. He took his disciples through the cornfields or wheat fields. I don't know what they mean by corn. They certainly don't mean the American style corn. So they were there, and they were eating as they went, picking ripe things on the Sabbath day. And the Pharisees called him out on it because that was an offense. Certainly, if you look at the book of, where was it? Was it in Numbers? The books of Moses. If you look in the books of Moses, as they are called collectively, of course, if they weren't all written by Moses, they detail the time of Moses and the events leading up to the time of Moses and why they were in Egypt and why they had to be let out. If you look at those books. But certainly in the time of the wandering in the wilderness, even going out and looking for food on the Sabbath, even if there wasn't any to find, was considered disobedience. So, Jesus did and said things that were that upended things the way they believed them. And so the idea that things could come along that would sort of overthrow beliefs that we have now is sort of like, especially like, you consider the Sabbath. I mean, that was not just a belief the Pharisees had. It wasn't just some tradition. It was a very ancient tradition that went back to Moses. And that didn't just seem to be a tradition, but seemed to be something that was of God. But Christ claimed authority over the law. Does the Holy Spirit not have authority over us? I consider it controversial. How are you going to judge these things? I'll say this: anyone who thinks they have a new revelation better be darn careful, because start claiming new revelation, you can heap to yourself damnation, speaking on behalf of God when God has not spoken. So you better be sure. And like I said, I try to be a new wineskin continually, but one's capacity to do that is going to be limited. Someone brings to me something, it doesn't count if it's not true, but you react to every new thing. This is our reaction. We reject it if it contradicts what we already believe. That's our instinctive thing. It's like something comes to us against dearly held beliefs, or let's say not just dearly, but thoughtfully held beliefs, things we've thought about, things we've considered, things we think we know the truth about. You reject it, and you could totally be wrong. And that's something to be considerate of and careful of at the same time. Don't be quick to relinquish your dearly and carefully wrought beliefs, but don't be so stubborn that you miss out on something important. Oh, again, man, I feel tired this morning. Matthew 9:18. While he spake these things unto them, behold, there came a certain ruler, and worshipped him, saying, My daughter is even now dead, but come and lay thy hand upon her, and she shall live. And Jesus arose and followed him, so did his disciples. So, just before we go to this next part, because there's a little parenthesis here, sort of. This man, obviously, now, we'd gone through, he healed the leper. He healed the servant of the centurion. He'd healed Peter's mother. He went across the sea to the country of the Gergesenes, cured the men, or cast out the devils. It performed all kinds of marvels. The people were marveling, And now this man, obviously believing, seeing all that he's able to do, he believes that Jesus can do anything. I mean, Jesus walked on the water. I don't know. A lot of people didn't see that. No, he didn't. He made the storm to go calm, actually, so far. And so now a man says, my daughter is dead. She's even now it means she just died. Would you please come and fix this? Reaching out in the most desperate possible situation. Revive her. She's only just died. Is it not possible to bring her back? I mean, people who have just died now, they hit them with the heart thing, they bring them back, sometimes. There's all those near-death experiences they talk about. And I always say near death. Because I believe in death. And getting near to death isn't the same as actually dying. Like Lazarus in the book of John, he was dead 3 days. That's dead. That's dead. Verse 19, and Jesus arose and followed him, and so did his disciples. Okay, they all go. 20. I'm going to change my seating position. I think it's contributing to my feelings of fatigue. And I got pillows under my arm all the time because of my shoulder injuries. Let's adjust this. Sit a little closer. That's a little high. Whatever. Okay. And Jesus arose, etc. 20, and behold, a woman which was diseased with an issue of blood 12 years, came behind him and touched the hem of his garment. For she said within herself, if I may but touch his garment, I shall be whole. But Jesus turned him about, and when he saw her, he said, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith hath made thee whole. And the woman was made whole from that hour. So, he's on the way to perform this great miracle. This guy has faith, but this woman also has faith, and she says, if I could just touch him. There's a lot of people calling Jesus to come to them, come to my house, come heal, speak the word. And she's like, I don't even need his attention. I just need to, touch. And Jesus, and she touches. And he turns around and sees her touching him. There's another place, which could be a different incident. It doesn't matter. He feels her touching his garment. And he says, your faith has made you whole. It's not, the action of, a lot of people touched Jesus and were touched by him, but were not healed. He must have bought things and exchanged money. He touched people. It doesn't always make things happen. He's not magical like that. I mean, he's magical. He's Jesus, but he's not a, like a magical healing statue. You touch it and you're healed. Because that's not what heals. According to Jesus, it says, your faith hath made you whole. Now, it's not just, I believe I can be healed, so I get healed. It's because they believed in him. God responds to the faith. God responds to our faith. And her actions are the outward expression of the faith, because she's actually doing something. It's not that she just thought, because she could say, well, if he would touch me, I know I would be healed. That's faith. But it's kind of dead. What if she just sat at the back of the crowd saying, if only I could get close. If only I could get close to him, I would be healed. Or the guy could stay at home and say, if Jesus was here, my daughter would be whole. Is that not faith? If I repeat these words, I'll be saved. She had to reach out and touch his garment. If I could but touch his hem of his garment, I could be whole. But she had to actually go and do it. Not because there was magic in the garment, but because faith is not merely what you think. Faith is your actions based on what, if you don't, if you truly believe things, you will do stuff based on it. If you believe your house is on fire, You're going to take whatever actions necessary. You're not just going to sit there and go like, yeah, the house is on fire. I guess, oh well, I'll go back to doing whatever I was doing. You know, faith changes our actions. It changes our behavior. The father goes, please come to my house. I need to bring you there, and I got to come get you. And she says, I got to touch him. I got to touch him because I believe he can make me whole. She had 12 years of an issue of blood. I guess I got nothing to say about that. I mean, there could be some sort of symbolic interpretation of it, but it doesn't occur to me as being significant at this point. You know, I know what it means, like a 10-year, a 12. You know, what is this issue of blood? It's probably something menstrual. 12 years of a blood issue. That sounds menstrual. Because you don't just have like it could be a wound that doesn't heal, I suppose, but the most likely place for something like that would be menstrual, just non-stop bleeding. Verse 23. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the minstrels and the people making a noise, you know, there'd be the sad music, probably in a minor key, you know, just whatever the tradition of when someone dies, you know, especially in that time, they would weep and wail, and you know, and why not? You know, it's sad, it's terrible. His daughter had died. They were all weeping and wailing, but he had gone out and tried to do something about it. Because the Lord Jesus was walking the earth. You know, and the thing is, you know, people say, well, why doesn't miracles happen today? Well, people say they do. You know, there are people encounter miracles. I mean, I've encountered things where it's like, I'm like, well, that was strange. You know, I don't have like the instrumentations to prove. I don't have. I never encountered anything serious enough where it was like I knew for sure. Other than when I received the Holy Spirit, that was miraculous to me. But it was not a miracle in the sense of like a healing. It was like it was very personal. And I talked about that on Saturday in detail. Verse 24. And he said to them, give place. You know, make way, move out of the way. For the maid is not dead, but sleepeth. And they laughed him to scorn. They laughed him not because they thought it was funny, but because they thought him a fool. And that's exactly what that laugh to scorn indicates. It's like, it's not a set question of anger. It's just, this man is a fool. This girl's dead. They say, no, she's just sleeping. Because he's being somewhat, I mean, here he's using sort of reverse form of hyperbole, gross understatement. But sleep is a euphemism for death, and Jesus speaks it as though she is just literally sleeping. Because to him that is. It's like as we sleep, we appear dead. So when we are dead, to God, we are but asleep, and he can raise us from it. Our souls sleep. I know people don't like the term soul sleep, but that is kind of like what happens. I was describing it to someone. I'm like, it's like all your, you know, without the body, you have no sensory organs. You still exist. You don't cease to exist, but like, you don't have sensory organs. You don't have sight. You don't have sound. You don't have taste. You don't have touch, unless you have a body. So unless you believe when you die, you instantly have another body, without a resurrection, without a transformation, you know, I mean. And then my point becomes, well, then why do we, you know, most Christians believe we return for our bodies later after that. So I believe in death, that death is real, but the soul goes into a state of, basically it like collapses into a singularity. All the events of your life, you become reduced to basically an idea, which is no longer active in the world, which is no longer possessing a body with which to interact with the normal things we understand and consider real. like the real world as we experience it. Like, I don't know how without a body you would expect to experience anything like a world. There's no experience, there's no feeling or thought, because there are no organs. Because you need eyes to see, you need a nose to breathe, you need a mouth to speak, and ears to hear, and senses to touch, and you need a brain to think. You still exist, but you don't have the organs of experience, in my opinion. Without those organs of experience, and not just my opinion, it's my opinion based on the scriptures, but I recognize the fact that other people disagree. But I think there are a lot of reasons that's wrong. But I don't want to make this about that. That's why I'm just saying in my opinion, so that it doesn't become a distraction. You know, some people, think that if you have just one little different opinion, and I've suggested this myself, if you have one little different opinion, you're a heretic, and therefore we cannot listen to you. And that's one of those things that's like, well, shelve that idea, and we can deal with it at a later time. There's certainly better places to talk about it than here. But she's sleeping. That's how God sees death. It's like sleep. And here's the thing. Whatever. The sleeper is not up and around walking and interacting with you. They sleep. They lay. They're quiet. And they laughed him to scorn. You fool. She's dead. Scornful laughter. But when the people were put forth, he went in. The man of the house took charge and got all the musicians and professional wailers out of there. He went in and took her by the hand, and she got up. She arose. And the fame hereof went abroad in all that land. It was a local big deal. And when Jesus departed thence, 2 blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him. And Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? They said unto him, Yea, Lord, yes. Then touched he their eyes, saying, According to your faith be it unto you. As you believe, let it be unto you. He asked them their faith. They've come to him. They've already physically done it, but he asked them to affirm it with their mouths. We need to do what we believe, but we also need to affirm it outwardly. It's not enough to just, we can quietly live our Christian lives, but we ought to also affirm it with our mouths. We ought to be ready to always give a reason for the hope that lies in us. That's something we're called to do. We're called to testify. Here's the thing though. It's like Jesus said about having a beam in your own eye. Set your own house in order before you start trying to fix everyone else's life. If we can't get our own life in order, at least, our own lives are never in absolute perfect order, but get it in order. You know what I mean? You gotta get to like upwards of 90% in order of your life. You can't have your life in just utter chaos. You gotta have it. You gotta be getting most things right before you start trying to help other people get it right. Because if you've got massive problems, your ability to help other people is severely compromised. And their eyes were open, and Jesus straightly charged them, saying, See that no man know it. But they, when they were departed, spread abroad his fame into all the land. A lot more chapter here. That's fascinating. I always like that. He very straightly charges them, which means like, I believe that means narrowly or severely. Hey, don't tell anybody about this. This is a secret. I always just wonder. I'm like, what? Why does he do this? Lord, why did you do this? Why was that? Because immediately people disobey him. It's like he just healed you, and you just refuse to take his word that you shouldn't tell everyone about it. This is the first time he does this. Jesus' fame was, and perhaps it's because his fame was growing so much at that time that he wanted to sort of back it off a bit, lest things proceed too quickly. I don't know. Excuse me, I got a hiccup. Have mercy on us, heal us. So he caused the blind to see, and that is, of course, you know, there's always a symbolic significance to that, because, like I said, paralyzed people, people who are helpless, people who have no, you know, he tells the paralyzed guys, your sin is forgiven you. That's so significant, because a lot of times, you know, like, we feel stuck. We can't change our lives. We can't change our position. We can't adjust where we are in life. And the blind, you know, like, I can't see the truth. I can't see my problems. I can't see the stumbling blocks in front of me. Blindness is such a severe handicap. I know a lot of people get along with it in life, but still, come on, you know, it's like, you're strong and you're amazing when you're blind and you're able to get around in life. And as someone who's always had sight, it would be such a humongous adjustment for me. You know, I'm too accustomed to the luxury of being able to look out on the world and just to be able to shortcut everything and just see. You know, blind people are really amazing how they get along. But imagine if you were blind spiritually now and you haven't learned to compensate for it. You know what I mean? Like, you're the kind of blind person who never learned how to read Braille or get around on their own, but rather you always had someone leading you by the hand. You know, you never obtained all the tools necessary to be functional, because, you know, blind people can be highly functional, and especially in this day and age with all the they have all kinds of training and etc. I don't know a lot about this, but, you know, I got in a debate with a blind guy once, and I was like, how he's on the internet, he's listening, he's busy, he's able to do stuff, and they have things to help you, obviously. I'm just saying, though, they still live very full lives. Well, so also do spiritually blind people. They lead lives that seem full. But obviously, you know the difference. When you can see, I mean, I doubt there's a blind person in the world that wouldn't rather have their sight. Makes everything a lot easier to be able to see. It relieves a lot of questions. You can do a lot of things in life without seeing, but there's so much more you can't. There's things you can't even talk about, things you can't even really, you know, there's just so much missing. I almost forgot I had a camera. I was sort of just like, I just want to close my eyes and cover my head up. There's so much that blindness prevents us from partaking in life, and so much so more when we think we see spiritually, but we actually are as blind as a man who cannot see. Where we are actually in darkness, spiritually speaking. And what is that? You know, I'm just saying, oh, spiritually blind, spiritually blind. I always don't like it when I don't define things. It's like when you... trying to think of something I always like, something in the past. It's like, I always did it wrong. You know, let's say, I feel like there's been so many things in life I was doing wrong. I don't mean even like sinful wrong. I just mean like you're using that tool wrong, or you're doing that. That's not how you do that. I think I saw actually a picture on the internet of like someone, like, you ever see those cardboard containers that contain different kinds of milk or whatever, and they're rectangular, right? And there's an opening on the top, and you always pour them with the opening near where you're pouring. Well, I saw a thing like that showed you're supposed to have it on top as you pour it, and so it doesn't spill or something. There's some like reason, And actually, I thought, yeah, actually that makes sense, because if I've got a rectangular thing, let's say I got something shaped like a rectangle, like my wife's phone here, and it's filled with liquid, right? You know, and I should turn it. I shouldn't like. I don't want the hole down here and all the liquid up here. I'm trying to pour. Blah, 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 it's gonna splash. But like, yeah, you put it like this, and then you tilt it, and it comes out. And I'm like, wow, I've been doing it wrong all this time. I just didn't see the design. Yeah, I mean, I just opened it and I put the hole close to where I wanted to put the stuff, not thinking about that there was some reason to it being designed in a way that was maybe counter to my intuition of how things ought to be. And that's how things are sometimes in what we believe. Is like sometimes we believe things a certain way, and the truth is contrary to what our instincts are going to be. You can't always trust your common sense. You can't always trust your instincts. Though, don't totally ignore them. But like I said, it's like we want to be flexible yet wise. As Jesus said, wise as serpents, harmless as doves. What a pair of contradictory ideas. You know, to be crafty like a serpent, to be sneaky even. Because, I mean, how is a serpent wise? I mean, they lie in wait. The idea of their wisdom, at least in the literal naturalistic sense, is of predatory. Sneaky, you know, serpentine. And doves, I mean, talking about harmless. My gosh, I walked outside today, and there was this mist over the fields. They just harvested the corn, and it's my favorite time of year, really. Other than actually early June when the corn is just sprouted and it's just, the whole world is just green. It's like a sea of green. But I like harvest because it's like I'm sick of seeing walls around my property, walls of these corn, you know. And I look out and there's all this mist, and I walked past our little sandy area, and there's just a baby dove just sitting on the ground there, just sitting. And I walked within 3 feet of it, and I saw it. I'm like, yeah, I probably would have stepped on it before it would have moved. Utterly harmless. And they build the most rudimentary, I mean, dove nests. If you ever see a dove nest, it's like, it might as well be like just a pile of random sticks, and then they just sit on it. I'm surprised they survive. They're so utterly without craft. I mean, they have the most simple and rudimentary nests. It's like the most unthought, you know, the most unwise, you know, I mean, I've tended to come to look at them not merely as harmless, but as foolish. You know, they just, I'm like, and they just leave their babies laying around, and somehow they manage. They don't even see how foolish they are. They don't even see all the danger they put their young in. They don't have the craftiness. But let's be crafty. Let's not be harmful to others, yet let us not allow ourselves to be harmed. You know, the snakes are sneaky like that too. They get out of trouble quick. They have a very strong survival instinct. Oh, we're at 8:03. No, we're finished. They spread about his fame. I already commented on that. I don't know what else to say except like, well, he just told them not to, and they did. And I always wondered if that isn't the one commandment that Jesus intends us to break. Or he knows they won't listen. Who can fault them? You know, don't tell anybody. You know, it just seems so wrong. Jesus said not to, and then they did. What does that mean? Is that like, I mean, maybe that is bad. I mean, they should have done what he said. I've often, conjectured the opposite, that maybe he, maybe he didn't intend them to do what he said. I don't know. It's one of those things, like, how do you tell? Go and preach the gospel to every creature. There's one thing Jesus said. Don't tell anybody about the miracle I just did. Such a contradiction, such an opposite. I mean, it's not a contradiction. You know, people get offended when I say that. But it is two contradictory ideas. Keep my ministry a secret. Go tell everybody. Go make disciples. You know, keep it quiet. You know, don't be a reed shaken in the wind. But don't be an old wineskin. It takes the wisdom and the spirit, and we have to be thoughtful about these things. We should be mindful of these things. We should be prayerful of these things. You know, if you're not sure, pray. And listen to the Holy Spirit carefully, you know, about what you really ought to do. Not what you necessarily want to do, not what pleases you to do, but rather the right thing to do. And that's not always so obvious. Anyways, we'll continue the study tomorrow. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to studying with you again real soon. Remember to subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. Visit oraclesofgod.org and check out my other YouTube channel. All that is linked in the description below. Thank you for joining me in this study today. I look forward to studying with you again tomorrow.
And there was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood saying, Rise and measure the temple of God.